Good evening. We're just allowing all our guests for tonight to join the Zoom meeting. We will start in 2 minutes. Once again, good evening. We're just 2 or 3 more people in the waiting room want just give the chance to also join the meeting, and then we will start. Avinu Shebashamayim, O Heavenly One, Protector and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shielded beneath the wings of your love, spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. Return all those kidnapped safe and sound to their homes, without the spilling of innocent blood, without their souls becoming tarnished by horrific acts. Strengthen those who protect our land, soldiers and civilians alike. Chaverim, Chavarot, friends, good evening. I thank you for joining us, the Wimbledon Synagogue and the South London Israel Forum tonight for this important update on what happened and what is happening in Israel since the horrific attack on Shabbat Simchat Torah morning. I know that many of you feel overwhelmed. I do so too. We are glued to our TVs, our phones, still reading all the messages and reports, aghast, and perhaps even with a small hope that indeed it was only a nightmare from which we will wake up any second, waiting for the last shocker before we wake up and realize it was only a bad dream. But friends, this moment will not come, I'm afraid. We are awake, and this nightmare is unfolding in front of us, eyes wide open. The tears we have been shedding are real. The pain we feel in our hearts is actual. I listened to the reports from Israel in disbelief and asked myself what went so badly wrong so that human lives no longer seem to have any value at all. How can a person kill another human being, let alone decapitate a baby? How can ideology transform a young man into a killing machine, committing such evil acts? I'm very, very cautious about drawing parallels with the atrocities the Nazis committed and today's war crimes. But here, I don't see much difference between SS troops raiding a village in Poland or the Ukraine and the Hamas terrorists who invaded Kfar Aza, slaughtering people worse than wild beasts. Chaverim, Chavarot, I know that my words are far away from being words of comfort, and I promise I will try to do better in a moment and in the coming days. But tonight is also a time where we can express the sorrow that covers our hearts and minds. Tonight is about coming together and hearing voices that are not the voices in our heads, reminding us that we are not alone in our grief. Tonight is a first step to understand what has happened, finding words and tools to step out of the state of shock that has paralyzed us in this nightmare loop. For tonight, we have invited 3 speakers that are here to share with you their analysis and impressions, allowing you to look at the events beyond the media coverage. Before I introduce you to the 3 speakers, I want to share with you 2 more things. Firstly, several of you have asked me how to speak with your children about the horrors of the weekend and in the last days. With the help of my wonderful colleagues from the Reform movement, I'm currently in the process of putting something together for you. I hope to be able to send it out as soon as possible tomorrow. In the meantime, I'm urging all parents to closely monitor the social media, internet activities of your children. Several organizations have recommended to delete TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube, and co. from the phones of children. This war is also a media war, with disinformation and anti-Semitic propaganda as its weapons. In addition, it is expected that the Hamas will release horrific videos in the coming days, which will be disturbing and, in many ways, also harmful, especially to our children. Secondly, some housekeeping for tonight. We will hear in a short moment our speakers. First, Sir Lawrence Freedman, and then Richard Parter. Then Judy Wolominski will lead a Q&A. Emily Parter will close our meeting tonight with an outlook on what you can do to help. If you have questions, please put them into the chat on Zoom. We will invite you during the Q&A to unmute yourself and repeat your questions or to make a short statement. We understand Zoom as a virtual extension of this sanctuary. It is a safe space for all of you. But I would like to remind you to please be respectful with and mindful of your words you use. We will ban everyone who violates our community standards. And an apology to all those who have joined us on YouTube. For security reasons, both the live chat and the comments function had to be disabled. We hope you understand and will nevertheless be able to get as much as possible out of this briefing tonight. Without further ado, I would like to turn your attention to our first guest speaker tonight. Sir Lawrence Freedman is Emeritus Professor of War Studies at King's College in London. He was Professor of War Studies from 1982 to 2014 and Vice Principal from 2003 to 2013. He was educated at Whitley Bay Grammar School and the Universities of Manchester, York, and Oxford. Freedman was elected a Fellow of the British Academy in 1995, awarded the CBE in 1996, and appointed official historian of the Falkland Campaign in 1997. He was awarded the KCMG in 2003. In 2020, he was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Science. He was appointed in June 2009 to serve as a member of the Official Inquiry into Britain and the 2003 Iraq War. Lawrence and his family are long-standing members of Wimbledon Synagogue and has often briefed us on international relationships and most recently the invasion of the Ukraine. Dear Lawrence, thank you for joining us tonight. My question to you, how could that happen? And what is coming next? Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for the kind introduction. I want to start with two apologies. First, I think we all feel a lot of emotion at the moment, but I tend to work on more dispassionate analysis, and it's quite hard in these circumstances. But I think it's quite important when we're trying to understand what's going on, to be as realistic as possible about the possibilities. And that leads to the second apology, which I don't really have great news. I think the options for Israel are very difficult, and this is going to require our understanding over the coming weeks. I don't want to spend too long on what went wrong, because I think we've been through all of that, but I think it's worthwhile just noting a couple of things. First, I think this is as much a policy failure as an intelligence failure. There were indications that something was up. I think these were received by Israel, but I think what they expected was rockets. What got them by surprise was the ability of Hamas to breach the fence. And then what aggravated that situation was that too much of the IDF was dealing with the problems in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and not enough had been left in the south. So there was, it took a long time before serious reserves and reinforcements arrived, and we know the horrible consequences of that. The result of this is that the Israeli government has been weakened, and you will have seen today that a national government is now being formed, with Benny Gantz going into the government. He's a former chief of staff. I think another one of his colleagues going in, also another chief of staff. And it's going to be a small group running the next stage of the war. And one of the conditions is that the judicial reforms, and indeed any other major legislation, is not going to happen while the war is going on. So the issues that have been dividing Israeli society are being pushed to one side while the war is going on. Now, we have to be careful in trying to look forward to what's going to happen next. First, there's a lot of rumor around you. Today, people believed that another front was opening from Lebanon. That turned out to be a false alarm, you will be relieved to know. Secondly, we don't know a lot about what's going on behind the scenes, what Egypt is up to in particular, which is a critical player in this, what Qatar, another critical player, as well as the United States and European countries and so on. So it's important to, I do what I can, but there's a lot of things where one's trying to make sense of very spasmodic news and not necessarily always reliable news. A couple of things of context. There's two reasons put around why this happened. The first was the increased tensions over Temple Mount and settlements and so on. The second is the Abraham Accords, and in particular, the moves that have accelerated in recent weeks towards an Israeli-Saudi deal, which underlines the isolation of Hamas, indeed of the Palestinians more generally, as well as providing quite a potential boost to Israel. I think both of these factors may be relevant, but this was planned for a long time. I think it reflects a much longer term frustration, exasperation, whatever, by Hamas with the situation in which it finds itself. But it hasn't really got a way out of it. You've got to remember the blockade is not only from Israel, it's also from Egypt. And the way it seemed to have been trying to maximize the surprise was by encouraging the view within Israel, within the Israeli government, that actually Hamas was concentrating on doing what it could to improve economic development. More people have been allowed out of Gaza under a deal partly brokered by Qatar. Qatar was providing quite a lot of money to the Hamas, to ostensibly to govern Gaza, and so you've got something that has been planned for a long time. These other contextual points are important, but they're not the whole story. Secondly, I think what goes on in the rest of the Arab world is an important thing to watch now. The main supporters of Hamas is not an Arab country, it's Iran. And then you have Hezbollah, which is an extension of Iran in Lebanon as well. The major Arab governments now all have relations, normalized relations in some way with Israel, or are moving in that direction. Few of them like the Muslim Brotherhood, of which from where Hamas came. Very few of them will want to see Hamas coming out on top of all of this. On the other hand, the populations of their countries are much more sympathetic towards Hamas. And I think one of the things to watch will be Friday prayers, to see what sort of general reaction you're getting in the Arab world to what's going on. And that's obviously related to the bombing of Gaza that's going on. If we try to look forward, Israel's basically got two options. The first, which is to stick with what it's already done, which is to cut off Gaza even more, electricity, water, internet, combined with air attacks on targets. The air campaign so far has been pretty intensive, and there will be debates about the quality of the targeting. But from what even Hamas has revealed, a number of their leaders have been targeted, military infrastructure has been targeted, and a lot has been destroyed. And I think this has been done quickly and hard on two assumptions. First, that for the moment there is sufficient international sympathy for the air attacks to be understood, if not quite applauded, and the recognition that this won't last forever. Secondly, I think the hardness of it is also intended for a deterrent effect, particularly to Hezbollah. It's to remind Hezbollah about what could happen to Lebanon if they start firing their rockets, which are incidentally much more accurate than Hamas's into Israel. So I think there's a deterrent aspect to this, as well as getting the worst over in the early stages. The effect of the and it's important to know that Israel did give warning and did give I mean, how much it's easy for Gazans to move away from areas where they may be attacked, but the warning was given, and some undoubtedly did escape. But we can see from the news that an awful lot of them didn't, and that will affect international opinion increasingly over time, and how long you can sustain a siege like this without electricity, water, etc., is also an issue. It's a humanitarian issue, apart from anything else. It may be about just making it very difficult for them to fight back should a land invasion come, and that's the second option that Israel has. And the general assumption is that's what's going to happen. There's large numbers of troops have now been gathered, are in position. The language from the Israeli leadership, from the military leadership, is to prepare for it. There are reports that Israel has told Egypt that they're planning for something which could last about a month. And one assumes that this will be geared at picking out military and political leaders, as well as particular sites in more military installations. I've been reading quite a bit of the sort of analytical commentary in Israel. There's clearly a lot of anxiety about this. Israel's done this sort of thing before to Gaza. We spent a bit of time in Jenin not long ago, and into Lebanon. It doesn't normally go that well. It's very hard to do, and the problem is that even if you get to what you want to get to, you can't stay for very long. There's no way that Israel has got the capacity to occupy Gaza, more than 2 million people, for a very long time. The mobilization that's already taking place will put a tremendous strain on the Israeli economy. So you're talking essentially about going in and then coming out again. And when you come out again, how much will it have been improved? So there's a lot of misgivings. At the same time, there's clearly an awful lot of anger and belief that somehow this time it's got to be different, and you've got to deliver a blow from which it's going to be very hard for Hamas to recover. We'll see how well they can do. The considerations that are going to come into effect on this are, first, the hostages. It's very difficult. I mean, there's 150 supposedly taken. Some of them appear to have been taken by sort of ordinary Gazans, just being opportunistic. We don't know, we haven't been told where they've been distributed, how safe they are, what will happen to them in the event of an invasion. And of course, whatever is said now, if there is severe loss of their life, that will rebound to a degree. So that's a consideration. And we're not just talking about Israelis here, we're talking about many different nationalities. The second consideration, which I've already mentioned, is Hezbollah. There's been a lot of talk that Iran planned this and encourages. I don't think so. I think the evidence there is pretty weak. I suspect Iran knew quite a bit about what was going on, but reports coming through suggest that the operational security that Hamas managed around this operation was very tight indeed. But Iran is clearly sympathetic. Hezbollah is sympathetic. There's been some, though the report from today turned out to be incorrect, there's been some shelling back and forth on the border. So it's a risk, and I think the assumption is that if this goes on very long, and if the loss of life becomes much, much greater, then there will be enormous pressure get involved. Notably, the Americans have already moved warships to the area as a warning to Iran not to escalate. But that again indicates just some of the dangers that are inherent in this situation. I think also Israel will be aware of international support, which is pretty strong at the moment. But again, extreme loss of life may affect that. Lastly, are there any political ways out of this? One of the difficulties we've got with this situation is Hamas is rejectionist. Hamas has always been rejectionist. Hamas has never shown any interest in a two-state solution. And indeed, in that, to some extent, it shares with some members of the Israeli government. So there's one of the difficulties I find in this is it's not clear what the political strategy really of either side is going to be over the long term. It suited the Netanyahu to have Hamas behind the fence and quiet. He had all the real interest on with the Palestinian issue is the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and I think that was part of the complacency which led to this to be ignored. But it's not clear what Hamas expects to happen because there's no deal it can do with Israel. It's not under occupation. It has its own entity. It's just under a blockade. So I think one of the issues for me, which I shall be looking at, is what happens in terms of Israel's relations, not with Hamas and Gaza, but with Fatah and the West Bank, because these have been deteriorating quite badly. And I think there will be some pressure to try to ease these, which will be difficult in these circumstances. So there we are. I mean, I think we're waiting to see if Israel does decide to move in, how it moves in, and what sort of response it will get. It's when you're at this stage of a conflict, it's dangerous to predict, and it's certainly dangerous to assert an outcome. Israel can go in and it can get out. I mean, this is what it's done in the past. The question is what it's achieved in the meantime. The pressure on the government to punish Hamas for what it's done, for the atrocities we've all seen, is very strong. But it doesn't help if at the end of this, Hamas isn't severely weakened. And we have to see, just a final point, it's probably true that many Gazans are fed up with Hamas. It's worth recalling that Hamas is in charge, in part because they won an election, but also because of a civil war with Fatah in 2007. It may be that they would like a choice, but they don't have much of a choice at the moment. And my concern will be that the Hamas leadership can hide, will move out of, will move away from any Israeli forces and come back again. But we'll see. I mean, there's an intensity to this campaign that was not necessarily there in previous ones, and maybe it will, and hopefully it will, if it happens, achieve more. Thank you very much.
I thank you. Thank you very much. And I think we will first also, for a short moment, turn to Richard Parter, who will give some thoughts and insights from his perspective, and then we open for the Q&A. Am I right? Good. So our second speaker for tonight is Richard Parter. Richard has over 15 years experience working alongside government officials, diplomats, and journalists. He regularly briefs British audiences on Israeli politics and security issues. He has appeared on the BBC and has written in a range of publications. He is also responsible for the delegations of BICOM or BICOM, Britain-Israel Communications and Research Center, and that BICOM brings to Israel. Richard joined BICOM from the Israeli Prime Minister's office, where he spearheaded the engagement with foreign press. Following the Second Lebanon War, he received the Prime Minister's Prize for Excellence. Richard served in the IDF Armored Brigade, where he twice received commendations and continues to serve in the reserves. He holds an BA in Philosophy and Politics from Manchester University. Peter joins us tonight to give us an update from Jerusalem. But before you do so, Peter, may I ask you, Richard, sorry. Before you do so, Richard, may I ask you how you are coping? How are you and your family holding up?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much indeed for having me. It's a real honor to sit on a panel alongside the professor. I'm familiar with his work for many years, and it's a genuine pleasure to listen to this evening. So thank you for your comments. In broad strokes, I'll keep my comments relatively short because I want to get to your questions and hopefully be able to focus on the issues that are interesting you and on your mind. I mean, first of all, in terms of how we're coping, thank God my family are fine here in Jerusalem, although, as you know, Israel is a very small country, 3 degrees of separation amongst most of us. And so amongst our wider community and friends and associates, we know of families that have kids missing, and it touches every house, if not directly, indirectly. So it's a very difficult time. I think, speaking for myself and others, we're still in shock to a large extent because this was such an unprecedented event that's really going to take a long time to really understand and get our heads around. But there is a juxtaposition, and I think the second aspect, probably similar to kind of the British stoicism reflected in the Second World War when London was bombed, that the Israelis as well have a very much a tenacious side of them. They show fortitude, although this conflict in itself particularly has been unique. We've been in plenty of times in other very difficult situations, and therefore there's an aspect of kind of just to get on with it and to make the best of it regardless. Just today, I've spoken to contacts of mine down on the Gaza border, and I think despite the horrific experience that they've had, that's the attitude that they're exhibiting, and that's kind of very impressive. And if there's anything to come out of this, it's the fortitude and the characteristic of so many Israelis. I'll give just a little bit of background, kind of from you can hear from my accent. I'm London born and raised, although I've been in Israel almost 25 years. When I first arrived in Israel, I volunteered to serve in a combat unit as a way to engage and ingratiate and absorb myself into Israeli society, and then found myself serving inside Gaza for 3 months during the second Intifada, and got a lot more than I bargained for. We had gun battles inside there almost on a nightly basis, and serving as a reservist for over 15 years, I've been back onto the Gaza border on several occasions on duty there as well. In my former role in the Prime Minister's office, we were there during the week of disengagement. We were there every day walking through the different 22 communities when the settlers were uprooted. And again, I was privileged to an extent to kind of witness history in the making. In this sense, kind of the great hope that we were handing this over, and that this would be, as the messaging at the time, I remember, was kind of giving them the choice to be that Gaza could be Singapore or Somalia. And sadly, it appears which one has evolved. Over the last 15 years, when I've been working for BICOM, I have regularly, as you mentioned at the beginning, I regularly take groups of British journalists and also politicians around the country, and almost every one, we take them down onto the Gaza border to appreciate the realities of life. Kfar Aza, which has been in the news, particularly yesterday, suffering the brunt of some of the most vicious attacks. I've been there 4 times this year. I know several people who live on that community. I've walked around on their lush lawns, kind of, and as they used to describe it to their visitors, that this is kind of 99% heaven and 1% hell. And I'm fearful that those ratios have now changed irreconcilably due to the events of Saturday. I'll just make a few other kind of comments, also kind of on a political and security assessment. First of all, it's important to bear in mind the status quo and the Israeli government policy up until last Friday, and this also shows kind of just how perhaps naive and duped they were by what the status quo meant. And I'll expand on that on a few factors. There was conventional wisdom that said up until Friday that Hamas were not interested in a conflict. Hamas was interested in proving that they could be a government, improving the lives of the Gazan citizens. And the evidence for that was kind of in the last 2 rounds of fighting over the last couple of years, Hamas actually sat out of those rounds. And it was a much smaller organization, Islamic Jihad, that led the kind of the vanguard of resistance, according to their narrative and lexicon, but kind of they led with the attacks and with the rockets, and Hamas weren't to be seen. And so there was a hope that they had moderated or understood that there was kind of a bigger issues at stake for governance. Similarly, both Israel and Egypt acquiesced to the Qatari demands to bring in fuel, to bring in cash and payments to their civil servants. And again, that was something that Israel recognized in order to bring stability. And perhaps most incredible, especially bearing in mind that we have this, as they like to say here, a full-on right-wing government, that even this full-on right-wing government approved over the summer the idea to start exploration of offshore natural gas off the Gaza coast. Which was an incredible concession, because bear in mind, again, up until this weekend, one of the major blocks of Israel allowing heavy, large-scale infrastructure projects and investment into Gaza was because since 2014, Gaza has held 2 Israeli civilians captive and the bodies of 2 Israeli soldiers that fell in 2014. And so as a result just of those 2 bodies and those 2 Israeli civilians, that was considered enough of a blockade. So now we have 150 estimated hostages. This kind of takes us really back to a very, very, very difficult situation that one can't see any alleviation until there is some movement there. When it comes to freeing hostages, kind of by the standard playbook, you've got 2 choices. You either negotiate or you send in special forces for an operation to mount a rescue effort. Neither of these options are viable right now. I'd say negotiations are off because the terms in which Hamas would need, they've already said that they would demand the release of every other Hamas prisoner in Israeli prisons. This would give another huge tailwind to terrorism and give Hamas another incredible victory. And I don't think there's appetite, not even amongst this government, but amongst the Israeli public, to release all those prisoners. And because of the complexity inside Gaza, as the professor mentioned, the likelihood is that the hostages are proliferated and spread all over Gaza. I mean, again, I'm not privy to the intelligence, if there is any, of where they're hiding. But to go in with special operations and try and release it where they're likely to be booby trapped and all sorts of terrible scenarios were that to be tried, it's a very, very difficult situation that we are now facing. A couple of other points, and I said then I'll close off. First of all, we are aware, mentioned earlier, kind of the threat looming from the north as well. Although there is no direct evidence of the Iranian influence or control over this latest operation, I've written it and we've been speculating for over a year now the coordination that is happening behind the scenes, particularly in facilitated by Lebanon, of the resistance movements, the axis of resistance under Iranian patronage, meeting up and sharing work plans. Again, bear in mind that Hamas as Sunni Muslims are not the natural bedfellows of Iran or Hezbollah, which are both Shia. In fact, whenever there's been protests against Hamas, very, very rare, but when there are protests against Hamas in Gaza, they are taunted by calling them Shia because of their connection to Iran. And that goes even more so for Islamic Jihad. So all of this, the capabilities, and if we look for a moment at this attack, which, as well as the Israeli failures, and we can talk more about that, of what we know, but the impressive, I mean, if we're honest, the impressive tactical skill set that they were able to deploy, launching 2,000 rockets that acted as a cover, and then sending drones. I've also heard accounts of that they deployed cyber weapons in order to block the Israeli telecommunications and cut off their electricity. The targeted drones, similar to we've seen of Russian tactics of dropping them on strategic locations, on the sensors, on communication systems, on the cameras. It points to a level of high sophistication, let alone the level of explosives that were used to break the breach in a very sophisticated wall. All that points, although there's no smoking gun, to an Iranian influence, certainly paying for this, inspiring them, giving them the technology, and probably, listen, they managed to smuggle in motorized paragliders. And so this technology comes from somewhere. And the main supporter here is Iran. And this is where the connection with Hezbollah comes, that there is an open question of whether we will find ourselves in a second front. The Israeli security doctrine is based on the fact that they, in a worst case scenario, they can fight on more than one front, although it's certainly suboptimal and would be a real concern to so many Israelis here. I think from the starting point of Saturday, if this conflict just ends in a localized dispute in over the Gaza Strip, that in itself would be, to an extent, a success. The significance of the US moving the aircraft carriers to the coast is clear. A posture against the Iranian and Hezbollah influence. I would be amazed if we actually see any kinetic activity coming from the US. That would be truly unprecedented, because we've never seen that in 75 years. Israel has never asked for direct engagement of any of their allies. Israel has always prided itself that it will fight the wars for themselves and by themselves. But the weaponry that they have available is certainly most welcome, and the supply of weapons akin to 73, really, when the US stepped in as well. But that posturing in the Mediterranean is incredibly important to send a message to Hezbollah. And the speech last night of President Biden, Israeli analysts have described it here as probably the most pro-Israel statement ever made by a US president. The line that stuck up for in particular for people was when he said, "Your security, Israel's security, is the world's security." It was a very, very powerful line for a US president to come out with, and very much appreciated here in Israel. So whilst the Saturday's events were so horrific, we are gladdened by that public support as well. The British government has been absolutely, I think, exceeded expectations in terms of the support they're showing both to Israel and to the UK Jewish community, of which you should be very, very proud as well. Foreign Secretary Cleverly is made a visit to Israel. I'm trying to think. I'm not aware of any other senior politician that's arrived so soon. So that's also credit to the British government. But having said that, we're all aware that from previous rounds of Gaza conflict, we know that it often starts off with support. There's understanding that Israel was attacked, yet the sensitivity around non-combatants is clearly a very sensitive issue. This issue that Israel has closed off all the access to supply of water, electricity, and fuel is my interpretation of that is that this is a short-term pressure move. But I don't think it's going to be successful. I don't think you'll find the Gazan population turning on Hamas because of it. It's just more reason to resent and to hate Israel. And although kind of they can argue by international law that there is no necessity after Hamas has carried out such attacks to offer and extend the courtesy of those services, we have to be open to reality that there's no other way that they can get in electricity and water. Egypt. The Egyptian border just doesn't have the capacity in which to serve that. So there is the threat of a humanitarian disaster in Gaza is not, we're not there yet, but it's real on the horizon, and that also should be a concern and needs to be a concern. The Israeli the new formed security cabinet need to take that into consideration as well. So bottom line, there are no good options here for Israel. Everything comes with a very heavy cost, and so we sit here very concerned.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I will just highlight all speakers for now.
So Jonathan Oppenheimer, you asked the first question. Would you go ahead?
Yes, I mean, given that it must have been that a tremendous amount of planning over a tremendous amount of time must have gone into this appalling action. And given that I imagine the Hamas leadership are not completely crazy, I mean, they may be absolutely beyond imaginably evil, they must have also foreseen the inevitable Israeli response. So what is the rationale of their action?
I try. It's very difficult to get in their minds. What I think we have to consider the possibility that this all went far further than they expected. As Richard described, this was a very audacious and carefully planned move, probably over a year, that it took. They did their best to lull the US into the Israelis into a sense of complacency. They breached the fence. They went for border posts. And the assumption is that in the first instance, their objective was to have a battle with the IDF and take hostages, but IDF hostages. I wouldn't want to grant them that they didn't expect to be fighting civilians as well. But there is a view that they then, one thing then led to another, and they just basically went on the rampage. And the proximity of the music festival, where some of the most horrific scenes were found, I can't imagine that was part of their planning. So it probably, I mean, there's some sense in some of the things that Hamas people have been saying, that this went much further than even they expected, and that partly explains the response. But they will have expected Israel, a bombing campaign by Israel. I mean, that always happened. They would have expected some sort of response. They probably wanted to draw attention to their own, remind people of their role in the wider Palestinian struggle. And I think they don't like the Abraham Accords, and I think they would be trying to put a spoke in the wheel of that as well. Richard and Emily agree with that.
I'll just make
that.
Just one more point on that. I think there's one explanation where the Hamas, as opposed to the rational actors of looking to be for good governance, it proved itself this weekend that they have returned to their core roots of the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, which is a fundamentalist anti-Semitic ideology, which is about the destruction of Jews, and that's sadly what it's proven itself. But again, I want to make another point where it doesn't have to be this way. And I think I want to draw a juxtaposition and example of the Muslim Brotherhood that we have inside Israel, because in a rare moment of true leadership, first of all, Muslim Brotherhood is all over the region. It's banned from parliament in both Egypt and Jordan. But in Israel, the Muslim Brotherhood sits in the Knesset and was actually part of the last government. And its current leader, Mansour Abbas, is a rare breed of a true leader. And I say this because as the representative of the Israeli Arab community, he made the most brilliant, impassioned arguments for the Israeli Arab community not to be pulled in to the Hamas ideology, to understand that there is another way, that under his version of Islam, they can live, even he said it last year, under a Jewish state. I mean, that's when it comes down to these core issues, then when you have a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood inside Israel that recognizes the rights of the Jewish state to exist as a sovereign entity, and the right of a Muslim minority to act and have obviously full rights, but work for the improvements of their community, that's true leadership. And where we saw from Hamas genocidal, I mean, people are referring to them as, I don't like the kind of Nazification of it. I think we should be very careful, but maybe this weekend, sadly, it's an accurate analogy, but it doesn't have to be that way for all Islamists.
And so, and of course, Israeli Arabs were killed as well by Hamas.
Thank you. The second question is from Richard Harris. Please, would you unmute?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. My question is, would the Arab world ever offer a homeland to the Palestinians?
No. I mean, the refugee, I mean, part of the whole problem, and Gaza is a good example of it, but also in Lebanon and elsewhere, is that the refugee camps were maintained after 47, after 48, in order to demonstrate that they were there to go back to their ancestral homes, to go back to Israel. One of the key episodes in the history of the relationship between the Palestinian people and the Arab world was the number of Palestinians that were in Kuwait in 1990, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, and the support given by the Palestinians to Saddam Hussein in the invasion of Kuwait, for which Gulf Arabs just didn't forgive them. So the opportunities for assimilation have been there, but I mean, this is really part of the problem. We tend to assume homogeneity, and Richard gave a very good example of even the Muslim Brotherhood varying from country to country. But the Palestinians don't get a lot of, they get in some ways more support in the West at times than they do in the Arab world.
Thank you. David Razrose.
Thank you. It seems relatively easy for the IDF to destroy many, many buildings in Gaza. They are giving warnings, so I understand, so the casualty rate may be less, but what exactly does Israel get out of having a wasteland in Gaza? There's nowhere for the Gaza people to go. The borders are closed. It's unlikely that anything will be open. So what will we have? A city of tents? What's the idea of it?
Whether Richard can say something about it, but I mean, my view, first, I mean, it's quite a large area, and certain districts have been bombed to pieces, but a lot of districts are not bombed to pieces. The targets are military infrastructure, the tunnels that were used. Incidentally, the tunnels didn't go under the fence. The tunnels took them right to the fence, which is one reason why they weren't detected getting there. And the rocket, and what they can find about of rocket launches and so on. Of course, rockets are still being launched, and the houses and places of the leadership. What happens when the bombing stops? A lot of this will return. I mean, and that's what's happened in the past. So the question is, can it be to an extent this time that doesn't make it so easy for them to come back, and the human costs and the toleration of that. So it's wrong to say that there are no military-related targets involved in all of this. It would be naive to believe that the impact just stops at military-related targets.
I would only
Thank
add that, I mean, we know that, I mean, there are no good solutions here. We've been, sadly, we've been there since 2005, and Hamas has take over and 5 different rounds of fighting, and none of them have improved Israel's security or improved anything for the Gazans. We used to have a saying that the Palestinian Authority and Abu Mazen would refuse to come to power on the backs of an Israeli tank. But I just want to posit that as maybe perhaps far-fetched, and the logic may still hold. But if Israel's objective in this current operation is to obliterate the Hamas leadership, both the military leadership and the political leadership, and that vacuum obviously becomes very, very dangerous. Maybe there is an opportunity to reinsert the Palestinian Authority. And again, if I'm being really kind of playing fantasy geostrategic politics, part of the idea of connecting Israel to the Saudi plan is to give something to the Gazans. Maybe the Palestinian Authority get to reclaim Gaza as part of that normalization package. We're not there. This is complete fantasy, I stress. But in such difficult times, why not dream?
Thank you. I'm going to ask Sharon Cousins, please, to unmute and ask her question.
Hello, good evening. I think there's a sense that there's the ordinary, quote unquote, Palestinians who live in Gaza who are going to be horribly affected by what's about to come. And then there is Hamas, this prescribed terrorist group. But what is the overlap? What percentage of Palestinians in Gaza actively support and approve of Hamas and what they're doing?
So I wouldn't like to, not all, but I wouldn't like to give a percentage. They voted for Hamas. There was an election, but that was a long time ago. What they feel about their vote now, I wouldn't like to say.
I don't have the statistics to hand, but I would direct you onto the website. There's a very credible Palestinian pollster, Khalil Shkaki, that runs regular polling, and they're all available in English online, and you can check out what the level of support. For a long time, by the way, there's been an irony that Hamas has been more popular in the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority more popular in Gaza. Make of that as you will. If I was going to guess, and I probably shouldn't put any number to it, I'm going to guess that the support for Hamas is around 20%, probably no more than 30. But you can look on the internet and call me out for making that up, because it's only a guess.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Lewis Bronze to unmute and ask his question. Please unmute, Lewis. Bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you should be able to unmute. Okay, I'll move to the next person, which is Jack Steiner. Jack.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Lewis Bronze. The message said the host is not allowing you to unmute, but then it changed. So my question is, and thank you for a great session. Do you have confidence in Israeli army structures so that if they enter Gaza, the Israeli troops will restrain from the kind of barbarism committed by Hamas? I am worried about the thirst for revenge.
I don't think they would do that. I don't think, even if they had the opportunity, I think the discipline would be quite strong. To be honest, I'm more worried. I mean, we had some settlers in the West Bank having a go. I'm more worried, to be honest, I'd be more worried about that. I think the IDF will be pretty disciplined. They're not going to be having free range there. Every movement will be pretty tough. So of all my worries, that's not the main one.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can only agree with that. There's almost no precedent, and there's no ethos within the IDF that works in that kind of vigilante style. It is a highly disciplined military machine. Even the reservists probably have even more, kind of because of their seniority, have even more of a mature perspective. That fear doesn't register at all, to be honest.
Thank you. I'll ask Jack Steiner to ask his question, please.
What do you think Hamas expected to happen after their invasion? Or put it another way, what were their war aims in making this invasion?
Well, I've answered that a bit before. I mean, it's to gain attention, to show that they can do it, to disrupt ties between Israel and other Arab governments, to revenge what they would see as the aggressive activity of the Israeli government against the Palestinian people, to make a point, going back to Richard's observation about Hamas having some popularity in the West Bank, about what's happening in the West Bank while the Palestinian leadership there isn't able to do much about it. I mean, a variety of things. But you know, for somebody who studies strategy, the difficult thing is it's not clear what they thought would happen very much after the first move, as to where this is going to lead, because all the things that were mentioned before about the money going in, the opportunities for economic development, that's now all at risk, likely to be lost, while they're not going to get any new political dispensation. So what they thought it would lead to in the long term, I've no idea.
I'm going to ask the next question on behalf of Wendy Levy. How did IDF intelligence not hear whispers of Hamas's plans? Surely it couldn't have gone 100% undetected. And Richard, you said of late Hamas showed more interest in the governance of Gaza rather than fighting. Do you think this was a well-planned smokescreen that just happened on Saturday was the ultimate plan?
So, I mean, I don't believe that even Hamas is a unitary body. My view would be that there are disputes within the Hamas, and that at the moment, for the last 2 or 3 years, let's say the pragmatic wing of Yahya Sinwar and the political leadership, they were the ones that were pushing for the economic development and the improvements. But in the end, it was the military wing and Mohammed Diaf and his people and Salah al-Arouri that operates as the mastermind terrorist, and as I mentioned before, basing himself in Lebanon, making the connections between Hezbollah and other renegade terrorist groups. That was the ideology. That was the mindset that essentially won out. Why intelligence didn't pick up any of this? I've heard some speculation, but it's unfounded, so I don't want to expand too much. I think this was such a catastrophic event that akin to the 73 war, which is still being debated 50 years later. It's not an exaggeration to say that, there were going to be books written on this for years to come to understand just how Israel missed this, and how the intelligence lapse just was caught out by such surprise.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question on behalf of Robert Smith. Sorry, I just lost it. How did Hamas manage to bring such sophisticated weapons into Gaza? Were they brought through tunnels from Egypt, or were Egyptian border guards bribed to let them through? Just how robust is the Egyptian blockade of Gaza?
So I think there are 3 methods in which Hamas used to smuggle. The first of the tunnels that run through what we used to call the Philadelphia corridor, the strip between the sea and Kerem Shalom, by Rafah and the sea, where the Egyptian border is. I've heard intelligence experts describe it as Swiss cheese in the terms of just how many tunnels there were. To the extent that you could fit through full-size cars through these tunnels, tractors pulling cars even. Now, Egypt did make some efforts to shut them down, but clearly not all of them. And so some of that is a smuggling route which is still available to them. The second route is via the sea. There have been numerous cases where Israel's Navy has caught them, and if they're catching some of the smuggling attempts, you can bet that some of them have got through. And the third method is actually undermining and exposing where Israel allows humanitarian aid through the Kerem Shalom crossing. I was down there as well a few months ago. They said, they admit themselves, they can't check every truck. So there's no doubt that there are constant smuggling attempts to hide it, to use the goodwill of the international community, and to hide weapons and dual usage goods inside that humanitarian aid, which then also gets to Hamas. So sadly, there are the ways, and the fourth aspect is because of the training that they've received and support probably from Iran, well, only really from Iran. They have themselves a very basic but indigenous weapons making factory, and they've been doing this for so long that they've improved the capacity, the warheads on the rockets, the range of the rockets, the sophistication have all improved in the last decade. So they're able also to manufacture some of this themselves.
Thank you. I'm now going to go to Richard Galba. Please, would you unmute?
Hi, sorry, my camera's not working. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I don't think Hamas is a rational organization in the terms that we think of. We're trying to think of them doing things like we would, but they don't do that. They don't mind dying. They're quite happy with that. And I just want to ask the panel, don't they think that Hamas has actually achieved their aims? They have actually proved that Israel is beatable. The aura of invincibility has actually been pierced in a way. Thank you.
I think there's some truth in that. I mean, if you go back 50 years to the Yom Kippur War, Sadat lost the war. I mean, Egypt lost the war in the sense that its army was defeated, had to be rescued by negotiation. In the end, Syrian's army was defeated. But the crossing of the canal was seen as such a military achievement that Sadat was able to trade on that, and in fact used it to make possible the later peace with Israel. So I think that there is a sense, which may be felt more by Israel than Hamas, that something of the aura of military strength has been broken. But, you know, this isn't the first time that Israel has been attacked. It's not the first, certainly not the first time it's received rockets. It was the sheer scale of what happened that made the difference in the audacity of the attack. So this will linger. This is a consequence of the attack. I doubt if that was the only thing they were trying to achieve. But it is a consequence with which Israel now has to live, just because after October 73, Israel felt more vulnerable as a result, even though it had been successful in the war. So it's a factor. Again, I think their aims went beyond that, but this is certainly a consequence, and one of the reasons why there will inevitably be a lot of investigations and so on once the war is over, as there was after October 73.
Thank you. Alex Hable.
Hi, it's actually Shay.
Sorry.
I'm interested to know how you think that the Israeli Arab population will respond or react to both the incursions and the terrorism, and also Israel's reaction.
Well, Richard answered that, I think, before.
But he spoke about the leadership. But what about?
I think. Well, I'll let Richard respond. My guess is it's going to get harder as time goes on. I mean, I think it'll be hard to ignore if the images are of Palestinian suffering. I think that will make an impact. But the way this started is going to make a difference, unlike other situations. That's my guess. I don't know if Richard would like to add.
I mean, I just add that I think there's no uniformity amongst Israeli Arabs. They're divided kind of on the radical extreme. There may be some that are supporting Hamas, and then on the other extreme there are those that are proud of their Israeli identity and understand that they're so dangerous, and probably a fair amount in between as well. And that's kind of where the politics of the Israeli Arab community are at. And we can only hope that whilst it stays quiet and kind of, again, we've seen no real backlash either in the West Bank either. We don't want to speak too soon because we've obviously endured a very difficult 2 or 3 years in terms of an uptick of terror from the West Bank as well. And God forbid what happened in spring 21 when the Israeli Arabs did get involved in violence. Thankfully, we're not there, and hopefully we won't be there.
Thank you. Could Sarah Reinhold ask her question?
It's actually Richard Reinhold, and my question was, do you think that with the bombing of Gaza and the death of so many innocent Gazan people, that this has done a recruitment job for Hamas for the next couple of generations? The hatred that must be felt towards Israel as you see their cities being bombed to bits. And the other point being that bombing a city to bits hasn't necessarily worked. I think we've seen that with Russia in Ukraine, and it just the bad feelings still exist, but even though the town may be destroyed. That's my question.
It's the blockade, it's the bombing, it's everything that's happened over the last 80 years. So the feelings are there, but we've also been through periods when there was possibilities of different sorts of relations, and the issue is how much. I mean, first, it's important. This isn't just like sort of massive air raids of the Second World War. They're more specific. If Israel just wanted to kill lots of people, there'd be a lot more than those that have been reported to die. That's not to minimize the deaths that have occurred, but the objective is not to kill Palestinians, but a lot of Palestinians get killed. And sure, it will lead to more recruits. And sure, as I've indicated my skepticism already, there's a limit to what bombing can do. But it does undermine the military capability to a degree. But we've been through all of this before. We've had bombing campaigns before. So the idea that this will solve it once and for all seems to me also to be unlikely.
Thank you. Ella.
Does Netanyahu really believes that he can wipe out Hamas? Doesn't he know that instead of everyone that will die, 2 youngsters will come instead?
It's a continuation of the previous question. I don't know what Netanyahu believes. I think normally we know from studies of other bombing campaigns that if people first blame those that are bombing you before they blame those who have put you in that position. So it's not going to make many Palestinians think fondly of Israel. But a lot are aware of the predicament in which Hamas has put them. This is still an authoritarian government of this entity. So while it's the case that Israel will get the blame for what people suffer, I think a lot of Gazans are aware that Hamas is not an innocent party in this.
I would just add that Netanyahu didn't choose this war. This has been thrust upon him. So so I think that's one kind of prism in which to judge that. And going by Netanyahu's history, and he's got a long history, he has always shown himself actually to be risk averse when it comes to military operations, which I also think partly explains why they've just maintained the aerial campaign so far, because Netanyahu's never shown any particular desire to go in with ground forces. He understands the risks. He understands. I mean, if you want to be the most cynical about it, he understands that electorally, that God forbid losing young boys in the army is not what he doesn't want to happen on his watch. So we're going to hope that cool heads prevail. And I don't think, even, by the way, I'll say something slightly controversial, I don't think even that the ground forces is inevitable. I think, again, just like I mentioned with the warships by the US, part of it is posturing, part of it is sending a signal that the other fronts shouldn't get involved. And so none of this is kind of muban me'elav, as they say. Is kind of, it should be taken for granted. Is obvious here, but be clear, this was not part of the Israeli government's plan at all.
I have to say I agree with that observation.
There's a comment from Jonathan Oppenheimer.
Oh, you didn't really have to give me another go. It was just a sort of answer to Professor Freedman earlier. We've been glued to Arutz 12, and it was suggested, I think, by one of their eminent commentators that Hamas did hope for this, in inverted commas, success, because there was a suggestion that captured terrorists, or a captured terrorist, who was part of one of these huliot, which have been picked up considerably later, had, under interrogation, said that they'd been lying low to be a second wave when Israeli forces were preoccupied with the aftermath of the initial carnage. If that's true, it suggests that, and just the amount of planning involved suggests that they must have had some hope of achieving something.
Oh, there were a lot. I mean, they're still finding people. They're still looking for people. The numbers Israel claims to have killed on the Israeli side of the border is what, 1,500 or something like that, which is an enormous number. If that's true, I'm not sure how good their counting is, but certainly there's a large number. So I think they were expecting quite a significant fight. And remember, some of the waves, some of the groups coming over, for example, those coming by sea, were intercepted before they got into Israel. So this was a big effort. The aim was to have a big fight. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And how much they planned sort of a traditional battle with the IDF rather than what happened, I just don't know. But they were certainly expecting to stay for a while with substantial force. This wasn't a few hotheads creeping through. This was a massive operation.
Goes to Tony Salem.
Actually, it's not me, it's Jill.
It's Jill. I've heard in some of the comments that the settlements in the West Bank were a big reason, amongst others, for Hamas acting this way, as well as other reasons in the way that they did. Does Bibi now realize that more settlements must stop, especially as the IDF were guarding the settlements rather than the borders, it seems, on Friday, Saturday?
I think, I think it was Temple Mount of recent events that was also important. I mean, the thing is that the West Bank and East Jerusalem have been much more active and important for both the Palestinians and the Israelis. That's where the points of friction are. That's where the communities are actually closer together. So I think when the postmortems occur, one of the big issues, and I've heard this from Israeli friends, is that so much of the police and the IDF were having to protect settlers that they weren't available for the South. And if that's the case, that's going to be quite a big deal. So, while Israeli politics is as it is, I wouldn't preclude the settlement issue going away. But this has certainly, I think, weakened the government. I mean, that's clear, one of the most right-wing governments Israel has had. It certainly weakened that government, and the fact that Gantz has come in and is going to be a pretty formidable voice in what is now a new government, I think will make a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have now the pleasure and the privilege also to welcome Emily into our round, and you have seen her appearance on the screen for a while now, and of course we want to hear from you, especially with one aspect that was very important to many of our congregants in the recent hours and days, was really a specific question also: how can we help from the UK? Many of us feel very far away, helpless in many ways, but I hope that you can give us some thoughts, some ideas on the way, so that indeed we can help.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join this evening. I am the UJIA director in Israel. As you can hear from my accent, I'm originally from London. I moved to Israel over 22 years ago. UJIA has been working to connect British Jews with Israel for over a decade, and for over a century rather, and for decades we have been working with communities in Israel on the ground and had a presence on the ground, working all around the country in the north and in the south. And so since Shabbat, I'll just share with you a few recollections and then launch into what we're doing and how you can hopefully help. So since Shabbat, as you know from everything you've been reading and hearing, we've spent our time running into shelters away from rocket fire, helping friends try to find their loved ones who are missing and unaccounted for. And, unfortunately, we've also started to attend funerals. And as been said earlier, and as you well know, Israel is a really small country, and everybody knows everyone, and everyone knows someone who's been affected, people who are dead, who are missing, and of course, people who are called up to reserve duty. And there is a lot of, there's a real sense of fear and uncertainty and devastation and heartbreak. And in particular, the news of the past 24 hours that's been emerging about the massacres that happened over the weekend in the kibbutzim has just left people reeling, and has been said already, in absolute shock. At the same time, there are some moments of real inspiration and real strength and resilience. The civil society has jumped into action, and from all ages, in all parts of the countries, in all neighborhoods, people are doing whatever they can to help the Israelis in need, to help the evacuees from the southern communities and also from the northern communities, to help the bereaved families. And it's really, really providing some hope in some really dark times. So as soon as the crisis erupted, UJIA, myself specifically, we contacted all our partners, all of those people that we're working with in times of quiet and routine, to see what's going on with the people that they work with, their communities, what do they need, how can we help? And so far what we've been doing is we've been helping to support deliveries of food and basic needs products, hygiene products, toys for kids, and things that people will need living in the southern communities and those that have been evacuated. We have also made an allocation of trauma to support trauma relief, because the trauma needs are going to be immense. The whole country's in trauma. The level of your trauma really relates to how close you have been to the direct conflict so far. And we've already made an allocation to support that for affected communities, bereaved families, and also lone soldiers. And just today, we actually committed to provide funds to help in the northern communities on the northern border, purchase equipment, flak jackets, helmets, communication tools, generators, and to make sure that they are ready and they have what they need in the event that the conflict does extend up to the northern border. So this is what we've done so far in the past few days, but the needs are really, really great, and we can't do it alone. This is a dynamic crisis. Things are changing and evolving all of the time. And we've also been told to prepare for a long haul. So, as you can see from the news and what you're reading yourself, the rockets are continuing to fall. Families are continuing to bury their dead, and loved ones are anxiously waiting for news of kidnapped. So what I'm going to ask for you is for your help, and for you to consider making a gift to UJIA's appeal. If you would go onto our website, ujia.org, and support the efforts that we're doing, everything that we've done so far and everything that we will be doing to address the needs in Israel of the people in the communities on the ground. We can't do it alone. Israel can't do it alone. We need you. We need your help. And I really hope that you will join us in this effort. So thank you for allowing me to speak with you this evening. And thank you for your support, and thank you for your solidarity.
Thank you very much. And I would like to hand the microphone to Michael Kellyan, who will conclude this meeting with a vote of thanks.
First of all, can I say I was delighted that the UJIA helped us put on this meeting. It's the Israel charity that I've been most closely involved with over many years, and went on various missions that they organized. I can't think of three better speakers that we could possibly have had. I'm also pleased that we were joined by Louise Jacobs, the UJIA chairman, or chair, I should say, who I hope will also come along to Wimbledon one day and speak to us herself in person. I'm sorry to the community that the whole of this meeting has been online. We would very much have liked to have accommodated everybody in the building, but for security reasons, you'll appreciate that we weren't able to. We'll be circulating some details of the UJIA link so that you can all donate. We realize that a number of you have probably already made donations, not just to the UJIA, but to other charities as well, equally worthwhile. But obviously on the back of this meeting, we're promoting the UJIA. And I would just like to thank my colleagues, the Rabbi, Judy, and everybody else who's been able to put this event together so quickly, and to say our thoughts and prayers are with Israel and our friends and relatives and the whole country. Thank you very much.
A lot of people are putting their thank yous in the comments, so we appreciate that you felt that it was an informative evening. Thank you.
Perhaps one last thank you to the police who twice while we were here having our meeting looked after us, checked that we are okay. Thank you to civil society who is standing with this community and with all the Jewish communities. Thank you and good night. And those of you who are having relatives in Israel who are not well in the one or the other way. You are in our prayers, and we stand with you. We stand with Israel. Good night.